I tracked down 20 movies from 1987 that nearly disappeared. Some banned, some bombed, some so weird you won't believe they even got made. There's a New Orleans cop film so steamy the ratings board almost banned it. A horror movie where the killer dolls actually made the crew sick. And that's just the first two. Let's see which of these forgotten films is actually worth bringing back and which ones deserve to stay lost forever. Let's start with The Big Easy. On the surface, it's a police thriller. Dennis Quaid as Remy McSwain, a New Orleans homicide detective, going up against Ellen Barkin's by-the-book district attorney Ann Osborne. They're supposed to be on opposite sides of a corruption case, but the real action is the messy, passionate affair that takes over both their lives. Quaid worked with a local dialect coach for weeks to get that Cajun accent, but he went so far with it, people in New Orleans still make jokes about it decades later. Even Quaid admitted he tried too hard, mostly to impress the real NOPD officers on set. Ellen Barkin and Quaid had so much chemistry, producer Stephen Frears said he had to cut takes because the two kept flirting off script. To be fair, the suspense plot was always the weakest part. What made it work was the heat between the leads. There was even some behind-the-scenes drama about the ratings. The MPAA hit The Big Easy with an X rating for just one love scene. Meanwhile, plenty of much more explicit movies that year breezed through with an R. Director Jim McBride didn't let it slide. He went public, accused the ratings board of hypocrisy, and a few critics agreed with him. Toys coming to life was a full-blown 80s horror trend, but Dolls stands out because Stuart Gordon directed it. The guy behind Reanimator and From Beyond brought that same twisted humor, and it shows. The dolls here are legitimately creepy. One even looks like an early Woody from Toy Story. And the stop motion gives them just enough life to be weirdly unsettling. The story is classic Gordon. During a violent storm, a bunch of travelers take shelter in a mansion owned by an old doll maker and his wife. All the dolls are possessed by the souls of criminals, hunting anyone cruel or wicked. There's plenty of gore, dark jokes, and some genuinely disturbing moments. No surprise, Guillermo del Toro pulled inspiration from this one later. The movie's production was a mess. Money ran out halfway through, so Gordon convinced a team of Italian animators to work for free for a few days just so they could finish the stop-motion scenes. They later admitted they couldn't leave the dolls half-finished. The actors had their own struggles. Ian Patrick Williams said he spent whole scenes talking to dolls taped to sticks or hanging from wires, and the props were so fragile they'd sometimes fall apart in his hands. Not every romantic comedy from the 80s worked, but Surrender is worth a look just for Michael Caine and Sally Field. Caine plays a wealthy novelist who's convinced every woman is after his money, so he gives it all away and pretends to be broke. That's where Sally Field comes in, a struggling artist with her own issues. And the two of them spend most of the movie tripping over misunderstandings, schemes, and a few emotional landmines. Michael Caine openly admitted he took the role because he wanted to film somewhere sunny, far away from the London rain. He said he didn't even bother to read the ending before signing on. Sally Field fought with the studio over rewrites that tried to make her character a one-note punchline. She pushed for the emotional beats, and Caine backed her up, so some of her key scenes made it back into the final cut. Even then, the original ending bombed so hard with test audiences that the studio flew Caine and Field out for a complete reshoot in another state with almost no notice. Caine later joked he barely remembers filming it because the schedule was so last-minute and disorganized. After Mad Max blew up, there was this wave of post-apocalyptic knockoffs, and Hell Comes to Frogtown stands out as one of the most entertaining. It's got Roddy Piper as Sam Hell, a drifter forced into a government breeding program after most men are left sterile by nuclear fallout. The mission is to rescue fertile women from a fortress run by mutant frogs. That's the actual plot. This is essentially a B movie. Sandahl Bergman, William Smith, and Rory Calhoun round out the cast, but it's all Piper, cast because the director wanted someone who looked like he'd been through real bar fights, not just a gym rat. The studio originally wanted a typical action guy, but the budget didn't allow for it anyway. Speaking of budget, the frog costumes were stitched together out of random creature suit leftovers from 3 different productions. You can spot the mismatched pieces if you freeze the frame. The rubber masks were so heavy and hot that some of the stunt crew nearly passed out between takes. Street trash takes low-budget, gross-out horror to its absolute peak. A group of homeless men find a crate of ancient Tenafly Viper liquor that literally melts anyone who drinks it into neon sludge. What follows is a wild, disgusting trip through junkyards, warehouses, and back alleys full of predators. This is the directorial debut of J. Michael Muir. He later went on to be a camera operator on major films like The Abyss and Dances with Wolves. Even Bryan Singer got his first credit here, working as a camera assistant. Fair warning here, the movie was basically designed to piss off or gross out as many people as possible. Every body melt scene pushes the limits, and most of the story ended up being improvised after financiers demanded less satire and more on-screen meltdown. The film's most infamous moment, the toilet meltdown, was shot in a real abandoned warehouse bathroom the crew found last minute. They didn't have running water, so after filming, the place was just left covered in goo. The chemicals used for the effects permanently stained the actor's skin for days. Steve DeJarnette, before he made Miracle Mile, delivered one of the strangest near-future films with Cherry 2000. In a world where relationships are just business, a regular guy goes on a desert trek to find a replacement body for his busted android wife. Melanie Griffith plays Edith Johnson, the tough-as-nails tracker he hires for the job. Production was a mess. They had about $10 million to play with, but flash floods in Nevada wiped out entire sets, so the crew had to rebuild locations from scratch. Melanie Griffith did a bunch of her own stunts, including hanging from a moving crane, because her stunt double actually quit over safety issues. The movie was finished by 1985, but Orion Pictures had no clue how to sell something this weird, so it sat on a shelf for 2 years. Eventually, they just dumped it to cable and VHS. The Hidden opens like a straight-up crime thriller. Some guy suddenly goes nuts, robbing banks and stealing Ferraris. Then he's gunned down, and immediately, someone else picks up where he left off. Turns out there's an alien parasite jumping bodies across Los Angeles. Kyle MacLachlan shows up as FBI agent Lloyd Gallagher, but you're never really sure if he's actually the good guy or something even stranger. It's a sci-fi action horror mashup, complete with body snatching, car chases, and strippers with shotguns. Kyle MacLachlan was fresh off Blue Velvet, so audiences went in expecting another Lynchian villain and spent the first half trying to figure out if he's the hero or not. The script bounced around Hollywood for ages. Every major studio passed until New Line finally took a shot. The execs honestly didn't even realize it was sci-fi until the movie was already done. They thought they'd bought a cop flick. The alien parasite was designed by Kevin Yeager, the same guy who created Freddy Krueger's makeup. The Monster Squad is basically Goonies if you swapped out pirates for Universal monsters and let the kids swear. A bunch of horror-obsessed kids realize Dracula is real, and he's teaming up with Frankenstein's monster, the Mummy, and other monsters to take over the world. The only thing standing in their way is this misfit squad and their homemade weapons. 1987 was a wild year for Shane Black. He cashed in with Lethal Weapon, acted in Predator, and co-wrote Monster Squad with his friend Fred Decker. Black loaded the script with jokes and swearing. The studio wanted PG-13, but still let a lot of it slide. The movie flopped in theaters, but by the early 2000s it was selling out revival screenings. Most people discovered it at the video store. If you were a horror kid in the late 80s, you probably found it there. In 2018, it even got a documentary, Wolfman's Got Nards, all about its cult following. The Stepfather is what happens when suburban perfection hides something lethal. Jerry Blake, played by Terry O'Quinn, looks like the ideal dad, clean-cut, polite, all about family values. But when his new family disappoints him, he snaps, just like he's done before. This is based on the real case of John List, who murdered his family and disappeared for almost 2 decades. What makes the stepfather stand out is O'Quinn's performance. From the first scene, you know he's a maniac, but he shifts between model father and unhinged killer so fast you can't look away. During casting, O'Quinn was so unsettling, the director said he gave everyone chills without even raising his voice. The film's intensity got it slapped with an X rating at first, thanks to the psychological violence, not the gore. Only after edits and appeals did it get knocked down to an R. Forget the sequels and the 2009 remake. The original is the only one worth watching. O'Quinn became a cult horror legend for a reason. Hope and Glory is John Boorman's semi-autobiographical look at growing up in London during the Blitz, and it's nothing like your typical war film. Instead of horror and trauma, the story follows Billy Rohan, a 10-year-old whose world becomes a kind of playground. Bombed out houses, school shut down, adults too distracted to supervise. Boorman put his own childhood on screen here, right down to the infamous scene where the kids cheer as their school burns. That really happened. The film took years to get made. Goldcrest Films finally funded it after nearly going bankrupt on the mission. They rolled the dice and it paid off. Critics loved Hope and Glory, and it's still considered one of Boorman's best, though it only barely broke even at the box office. Boorman always wanted to make a sequel about Billy being sent to the countryside, but no one would touch it for decades. He finally finished that story with Queen and Country in 2014 at the age of 81. Hong Kong City on Fire is one of those movies that managed to influence a whole wave of crime films, even if most people never saw it. It's about an undercover cop who gets in too deep with a violent gang planning a jewelry heist. What makes it work isn't just the action, but the way it plays with loyalty and betrayal. Ringo Lam directs the hell out of it, with action scenes that set a standard for Hong Kong cinema. City on Fire got a second life in the early 90s when fans noticed just how much Quentin Tarantino's Reservoir Dogs borrowed from it. Whole sequences, character beats, even some dialogue straight out of Ringo Lam's film. Tarantino always dodged the question, but Hong Kong film fans have called Reservoir Dogs a stylish remake for years. Even Tarantino's own producer didn't realize the similarities until after release. Escape from Sobibor takes on a true story, the largest prisoner escape from a Nazi extermination camp in World War II. In 1943, over 300 Jewish prisoners staged an uprising, killed SS officers, and broke out through barbed wire and minefields. Most were recaptured or killed, but more than 50 survived. Nazis tried to erase the story. After the uprising, they demolished Sobibor to wipe out all evidence. The story focuses on Alexander Pechersky, a Soviet prisoner played by Rutger Hauer, who helped lead the revolt. Alan Arkin plays Leon Feldhandler, the other key organizer. This was a British-Yugoslavian made-for-TV film, but it's done with real care. They shot the film in Yugoslavia under tight restrictions. Survivors of the actual Sobibor escape served as consultants and even appeared as extras. Rutger Hauer said it was one of the hardest roles of his career. He wouldn't take a paycheck until everyone else got paid, and later said he lost sleep after shooting the mass execution scenes. Wish You Were Here takes place in post-war Britain. It's about Linda, played by Emily Lloyd. She's a sharp-mouthed, rebellious teenager growing up in a dead-end seaside town, always at odds with her father after her mother's death. Linda flirts with local boys, breaks every rule she can, and when she winds up pregnant, the movie doesn't shy away from showing the real consequences. The script is based on the life of Cynthia Payne, a brothel owner who was a tabloid celebrity in the 80s Britain. David Leland, who was mostly known as an actor, directed this as his debut. Emily Lloyd was only 16 when she shot this, and Leland pushed her hard, sometimes too hard. There's one infamous scene where she's naked and clearly uncomfortable. Lloyd later said the film left her with lasting trauma, and she was treated like an adult even though she was still a minor. She almost landed Pretty Woman off this performance, but the studio thought she was too rough around the edges. Years later, Lloyd opened up about her undiagnosed bipolar disorder and said that the stress of the shoot actually triggered her first major breakdown. Stage Fright is still one of the most entertaining and downright bizarre slashers ever made. Director Michele Soavi, a protege of Dario Argento, kicks off his career here with something truly weird. It's about a theater troupe locked in overnight only to be stalked by a killer in a giant barn owl mask. Not just any mask either, this thing covers most of the killer's shoulders, feathers and all. The movie is a masterclass in strange, hyper-stylized horror. Real stage lighting, mirrors everywhere, and kills that get more theatrical as the bodies pile up. Soavi wanted every kill to feel unpredictable. The owl mask was chosen not just for the look, but because it actually made the fight scenes harder to choreograph. The effect is chaos on screen. Nobody, not even the actors, knew exactly what would happen. One of them sliced his hand open on a broken window during a take and just kept acting, bleeding on camera. The footage made it into the final cut. Angel Heart is the kind of movie that never would get made today. It's a detective story that turns into a full-on supernatural horror, with Mickey Rourke as a 1950s private eye hired by Robert De Niro to find a missing singer. The case drags him through New York and New Orleans, mixing voodoo, murder, and a twist ending that still holds up even today. Angel Heart just barely broke even despite great reviews because it's so unclassifiable. Part noir, part horror, with real atmosphere and style. But the real controversy hit with Lisa Bonet's sex scene with Rourke. It was so intense, the MPAA threatened to slap it with an X rating, and Alan Parker had to cut 10 seconds just to get an R. Bonet was still starring on The Cosby Show at the time, and she nearly lost her job over this. Bill Cosby himself called the studio to complain about her tarnishing her image. There were headlines for weeks about Cosby's daughter in an X-rated film. The studio tried to hide her from the marketing to avoid even more backlash. This one is a biographical drama about playwright Joe Orton, played by Gary Oldman, and his complicated, destructive relationship with Kenneth Halliwell. He's played by Alfred Molina, before anyone in Hollywood realized how good he was. The movie goes deep into their creative partnership and their breakdown in 1960s London, told partly through the people who survived them, Vanessa Redgrave as Orton's agent, Wallace Shawn as his biographer. Oldman almost turned down the role, said the script was too tame. Stephen Frears promised him a more honest approach, and only then did Oldman agree. Molina signed on early, spent weeks digging into Halliwell's mental state, even visited the real flat where it all ended. What you get on screen is real. Oldman's all talent and bravado. Molina is devastating. Even Joe Orton's family disowned the movie, called it exploitative. But for Oldman, it's right there with Sid and Nancy, a reminder of where he started, before the villain roles and the Hollywood years. Martin Sheen stars here as a police psychologist who, after losing his wife in a freak accident, moves to New York hoping for a clean slate with his son. Instead, he runs into an underground world of child sacrifice woven into the city's elite. This movie was a magnet for controversy. Those child sacrifice scenes caused huge backlash, especially from Latino and Caribbean communities who saw it as a racist attack on their religions. Jimmy Smits, who played a man losing his mind to the cult, later said the role made him deeply uncomfortable because it twisted his own heritage. On top of that, the production itself got a reputation for being cursed. Crew reported electrical failures, cold zones, and a run of injuries. It got so bad the director John Schlesinger actually called in a priest to have the set blessed. This was David Mamet's first time directing, and he comes out swinging. Tight story, sharp dialogue, everything dialed in. Lindsay Krause plays a psychiatrist who falls in with a con man played by Joe Mantegna and finds herself slowly being pulled into their world of grifters and hustlers. Mantegna really learned his stuff. Actual card sharks and magicians showed him the ropes, and Mamet even ran fake poker games in Chicago so the actors could pick up the rhythms of real cons. The big twist at the end was so secret, Mamet refused to give the full script to anyone, rewriting scenes on the fly. House of Games bombed at the box office, but word of mouth saved it. Magicians and con artists call it the best long con movie ever made. Really accurate. Bestseller is one of those movies that's easy to miss, but it's a standout if you dig thrillers. You've got Brian Dennehy as Dennis Meacham, an LAPD detective who survives a brutal robbery. He cashes in by turning his story into a best-selling crime novel. Years later, stuck with writer's block and looking for inspiration, Meacham gets approached by Cleve, played by James Woods. He claims he spent years as a corporate hitman for a powerful tycoon. Cleve wants Meacham to write his biography, a tell-all about years of assassinations with big business pulling the strings. It's not just talk either. Meacham starts digging and finds out Cleve's stories all check out. Suddenly, the people Cleve used to work for want both of them dead, and the whole movie turns into a tense road trip. There's shootouts, stakeouts, and plenty of old grudges coming to the surface as Meacham tries to figure out if Cleve is a genuine whistleblower or just using him for payback. On screen, the chemistry is the whole reason to watch. Woods gives one of his best performances, so intense that he actually made the crew nervous. Kathryn Bigelow might be known now for winning Oscars with The Hurt Locker and Zero Dark 30. But back in 1987, she made Near Dark, one of the best vampire movies nobody saw. Near Dark takes vampires and drops them into the lonely highways and small towns of the American Midwest. You follow a regular guy, played by Adrian Pasdar, who gets bitten and pulled into this gang of drifter vampires. What sets Near Dark apart is the tone. It moves at its own pace, letting scenes breathe, and it's beautifully shot by Adam Greenberg. The cast is stacked with actors straight out of Aliens. Lance Henriksen, Bill Paxton, Jeanette Goldstein. There's a shot late in the film, vampires running for cover in slow motion, that's still one of the most haunting images you'll get out of a horror movie even now. It's a full-on classic, and if you want to see how good vampire cinema can get, Near Dark's the one to find.